Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's Learning Live session. Thanks for spending some time with us this morning. We'll give everybody a minute to join in, get your coffee, get settled. My pro tip is always pull up MyGeotab if you have a second screen. Pull it up so you can kind of follow along with what we're talking about today. If you've been to these, you know what to expect, but thanks for spending some time. Today, we're talking about managing, measuring fuel efficiency and emissions. We have Dani today from our training team to give us this presentation. We will take the full time. If you don't have the whole hour blocked off, no worries. We are recording the session. If you have coworkers that are stuck in a meeting or unable to attend, they'll be able to watch this session as well. We'll email out the link to the recording. And please feel free to ask any questions as we go throughout this presentation. I know there's going to be lots of questions that come up. There's a lot of information coming at you, so please ask all those questions. Any questions, big or small, we want them all. And please use the Q&A function when you ask those questions. If you ask it in just like the general chat, we might miss those questions. We might not get to them. But if they're in the Q&A, we will get answers to every single one of the questions. I'll be answering questions as we go throughout the presentation. I'll be typing them in the Q&A portion. But any questions we don't get a chance to answer today, we will follow up with a document after this. So every question will be answered. So ask your questions. And we're excited for this session. I think that we're about ready to get started. So we'll welcome Dani onto the stage to talk about managing and measuring fuel efficiency. Thanks, Dani.
Thank you, Ishi, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're joining us from today. As Ishi mentioned, my name is Dani Jensen. I am a senior training specialist with the North America team here at Geotab, and I am super excited to be here with all of you today. And I appreciate you joining me for my session in which we will be discussing managing and measuring fuel efficiency and emissions. So before we get started, I just have a couple quick housekeeping items just to ensure that our webinar runs smoothly and provides the most value. So this session is scheduled to run, as Ishi said, for 60 minutes, and we will take the full hour. So the majority of it will be the content, and the last 10 minutes I have reserved for the Q&A to address any questions that Ishi and Jen are not able to address in the chat or would like to give an opportunity to address live. And to ensure the quality of the webinar for future viewing by all, I suggest please keeping your mics muted. But if you do have any questions, as Ishi mentioned, please feel free to share them in the Q&A section within this webinar. And any that I can address in the last portion of the session, I will address during the Q&A time then. But as Ishi mentioned, he and Jen will be moderating the Q&A to address any questions there. So I'd like to share a little bit about myself with you. So I have lived in Vegas for, it will be almost 23 years this coming June. And I've been with Geotab. I will admit this slide did need to be updated a little bit. So at the time I presented this, I was here at Geotab for 7, but actually just last week, I celebrated my 8th anniversary with Geotab. And so living in this city and working for Geotab, I've seen lots of change, lots of growth, lots of evolution. I've seen things come and go. So I'm excited to see what the future has in store for the company, and happy to share some of the current solutions that we have for managing fuel efficiency and emissions. Now, when I'm not training you lovely folks or doing webinars or trainings here at Geotab, one of my biggest passions is I love anything outdoors, especially hiking. So if it's camping, paddleboarding, anything of that nature, you can find me doing it. And additionally, my other biggest love is I'm a hobbyist voice actor, which has absolutely benefited me in this role because I love using my voice, and it's something I hope to do in the future full time. So let's talk about what we have on our roadmap for today. So first, I'm going to discuss the emission reduction journey and what that is and how it looks different for every organization. And then I'll go into the 4 different fuel efficiency strategies that you can implement today to reduce emissions within your fleet. And for each of those strategies, there's a couple Geotab solutions, either in the database or within our marketplace, which you can put into practice to incorporate those strategies into your fleet today. Now I have a poll that I would like to invite Ishi or Jen to share. And it's just a really simple question just to gauge where everyone is at in their fuel efficiency journey. So more of a statement than a question, but I'd like to know if defining what a fuel efficient fleet looks like has been a challenge for you as a company. All right, I'm seeing immediate responses in the poll. That's great. So far, it looks like overall it hasn't been a huge challenge, so that's awesome. And I'm hoping that maybe with Geotab's assistance and our support, I hope that has made that journey a lot easier for you. So we'll give everyone some time to go ahead and fill out that poll. And I will revisit that after we talk about the emission reduction journey itself. Right. Unless Ishi, will we be sharing it immediately right now, or we can give it a minute while I go through a couple of other slides? Okay. So we'll go ahead and, let's see. All right, so it looks like we've got the poll results. So it looks like an overwhelming response for all of you. It looks like it has not been, or actually, I'm misunderstanding my own statement. Sorry. So it looks like for the overwhelming majority, it looks like it has been a bit of a challenge moving forward with emissions reduction and fuel efficiency within the company. And it seems like the other side, it has been not so much of a challenge. So that's totally okay. So I'm happy to say that no matter where you're at within your own emission reduction or fuel efficiency journey, I'm glad that you joined this webinar with me. And I hope that when you leave this presentation today, I will have left you with some strategies and some solutions to be a jumping off point in helping make this an easier task to tackle. So I'd like to talk about our emission reduction vision for a second. So you all know that Geotab, we are a global leader in connected vehicle telematics, and we've been doing this for over 25 years. So if you're looking to operate more sustainably, we're committed to helping you make real progress against climate action goals. And so when it comes to fuel efficiency, our shared vision is this, which is to help your fleets accelerate your rate of carbon reduction. Now, this mission isn't just shared by me or by Ishi or by Jen or my team or their team. This mission is inspired from the very top, from our very own CEO and founder, Neil Cause. So together, we want to empower you through solutions, through our database, and from our marketplace that come in different forms, like reports, add-ons, and add-ins, to help you operate with reduced carbon emissions and help work towards your own goals and overall contribute to a net zero carbon future. Now, I'd like to introduce you to a friend of mine. His name is Felix, and Felix is the fleet manager of CurePath Global. So CurePath Global is a company that's committed to delivering essential medicines and medical equipment throughout all of North America. And Felix has been having some coffee chats with his boss, and they've been talking about the state of the company and where they're going from here. And his boss has noticed that many of their competitors are marketing sustainability initiatives right now. And with that, they're saving lots of money while also reducing their carbon footprint. And so Felix's boss has said, Felix, I want us to implement similar initiatives in our company. And I want to establish ourselves as a fleet sustainability leader within our own community. And some of the things I would like our company to focus on is I want us to become more fuel efficient. I want us to be able to reduce our emissions. And I'd like us to be able to lower any unnecessary expenditures and funnel those extra funds into the areas of the company that need it. And so as we can see, Felix has quite the task ahead of him, and he has a lot on his mind right now. So his mind is buzzing. Let's see what are some of the questions that he's considering right now. So when it comes to reducing emissions, he's wondering, well, how can we do this? Because just because we can't see emissions doesn't mean they're not there. However, how do we measure something that is so intangible? And alongside that, he's thinking about how much are we spending on fuel right now? I mean, is it fluctuating? What can we do to reduce our fuel costs? Because fuel is definitely one of the biggest expenditures for almost any fleet. As it comes to idling, he's thinking about, I wonder if our drivers are idling more than necessary. And is there any necessary idling? Is there any that could be preventable? And finally, when it comes to their actual fleet, what vehicles they have, he's considering which ones are they overutilizing, and maybe they're getting too much use, or are there some that are kind of not being utilized as often that could be put into more high impact roles. Now, in addition to those questions, CurePath Global has a mixed fleet. So they have 200 vehicles of a few different types. So currently, for their long distance deliveries, they have 50 semi-trucks that have attached trailers, as well as 50 box trucks for those long distance deliveries. And for those short distance and last mile emergency deliveries, they also have 100 vans to accomplish that task. So I invite you to join me and Felix to begin this emission reduction journey together. And throughout this presentation, again, I will share those strategies and solutions with you that he is also exploring in his own journey. And my hope is that in looking at Felix's own emission reduction journey, this will give you some inspiration and some takeaways to take back to your own organizations. Now, in order to make more informed decisions, Felix, of course, needs to know where they stand. So he wants to get some baseline information to be able to review to understand where is the company at with those different questions that he's had on his mind. So to kind of put it visually, when it comes to reducing emissions, just like exploring the outdoors, I consider it to be it is a lifelong journey, just like exploring. So there's never going to be a final destination. So for each of you, the journey is not going to look the same. And as we saw in the poll, there are some of you who have already adopted fuel efficiency and emissions reduction strategies in your organization, and there's momentum already moving forward. And for some of you in the poll, you've indicated that you're in the early stages of adoption right now and considering what does a fuel efficient fleet look like to you. But no matter which stage you're at in this journey, you've absolutely come to the right place by joining me in this webinar. So along this particular journey, first, we're going to explore the first emission reduction strategy, which is tracking and reporting on those emissions. Now, before we can look at reporting options, let's take a look at the different types of emissions that do exist and how we can categorize them. Now, while there are different ways to account for and measure greenhouse gas emissions, or GHGs, there is a standardized way that is globally recognized and accepted, which is called the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, or GHGP for short. Now, I do want to stress it is not the standardized way, but it is a standardized way to account for and measure emissions. And it also helps your companies categorize where these emissions come from within your own operations. And so this protocol is categorized by 3 separate scopes as they relate to a business. So first we have scope 1. Scope 1 is direct emissions from within your company. So for example, greenhouse gases that are resulting from fossil fuel combustion by your company-owned vehicles would fall into this category. More internally, if God forbid, say, a coolant leak was to happen from an appliance in the break room, for example, the emissions produced by that would also fall into that category. Then we have scope 2. Scope 2, these are indirect emissions owned by your company. And then finally, we have indirect emissions that are not owned by the company, but they are utilized by the business. So for example, this could be emissions as a result of supply chain operations. Now, while the majority of corporate emissions do come from scope 3 sources, which still present significant opportunities for emission reduction, during this particular webinar, we're going to focus more on those scope 1 emissions because this is the type that Felix will have the most control in his MyGeotab database to be able to view and to measure. So with that, let's now look at those 2 reporting options in MyGeotab. First, we have the sustainability overview. So this is a dashboard built-in report that is available in all databases and can be found under the sustainability tab. So this particular report is used to review sustainability trends, which then helps you make better, more informed decisions using objective fuel data in an effort to reduce your own environmental impact. Now, the dashboards and summaries within this particular built-in report, they draw from existing recorded data. So with that being said, in order to ensure that the report itself is accurate and provides the most high quality insights, at least 1 month of data, telematics data from your devices, will help ensure that the accuracy is top-notch. Another report that's more on the electrification side is the Electric Vehicle Suitability Assessment, or EVSA. Like the Sustainability Overview, this is also available in all databases. It is a free solution built in, also located under the Sustainability tab. Now, similar to the Sustainability Overview, this does, in essence, help reduce carbon emissions and fuel costs. But the way it does that is that it provides an accurate, holistic view of your fleet's electrification potential. So by inputting data manually, and also it pulls in data from within the system, that then presents accurate and tailored EV recommendations to suit your fleet's requirements. And this is based on driving patterns and other data. Now, the information within this tool, including the vehicle recommendations, we do update it quarterly. And when it comes to what type of emissions data is included, we only include tailpipe emissions data in the EVSA because it's really not very easy to measure upstreams. So let's go ahead and take a look at both of these reports live in MyGeotab with Felix. So I'm in the MyGeotab database right now. And as I mentioned, those two reports can be found under the Sustainability pillar menu in the left-hand side of MyGeotab. So let's first look at the Sustainability Overview. One other thing to consider about the Sustainability Overview, not only is it recommended to have at least 1 month's worth of telematics data, another consideration and recommendation is to make sure that you review and update your powertrain classifications for your vehicles in your database, because this ensures that the data is properly aggregated and fuel and energy usage data will be reported properly. So when I say update the powertrain classifications, I'm actually referring to groups, okay? So it's an imperative to make sure that your vehicles are properly classified in the appropriate vehicle type groups. So again, to make sure that you're looking at information and data for specific groups of vehicles. One other thing I do want to mention about the Sustainability Overview is currently it does not support FedRAMP devices or servers, at least not yet. If that does change in the future, we will absolutely communicate it through our partner and customer communication channels. So within this overview, it's displayed in 3 distinct sections. We have our metric summaries at the top, the emissions trend graph in the middle, and then we have our opportunities for reduction and electrification towards the bottom. So starting with the metric summaries, we have 3 distinct ones at the top. So this is a broad view of metrics for selected powertrain types and for the selected date range. So for this entire example, I'm going to be using the last 3 months as our time frame. And so with each one, emissions intensity, this summary is going to display average emissions produced by your fleet per the distance driven for that selected date range. Tailpipe emissions avoided, this is going to display emissions that your fleet's been able to avoid by utilizing plug-in hybrid or battery electric vehicles, if you have them in the fleet at the current moment. And then we also have the fuel and energy economy summary. So this is going to show the average combined amount of fuel and energy used by your fleet per unit of distance for that selected date range. Now, one thing to note is that whichever summary you happen to select, watch what happens to the trend graph and the opportunities for reduction. So if, for example, I switch from emissions intensity to the fuel and energy economy summary, now the numbers within my trend graph and in my opportunities for reduction have changed. Okay, so this is going to update the current data for the specific time frame. Now transitioning to the trend graph. So this is an overview of how the selected metric summary data has changed over time. So going back to that emissions intensity, even though the graph is going to show both the entire previous year indicated in the grayish purple line and the current year's worth of data, the orange line, represented by the orange line, this number right here, that is above that graph, and the percentage change to the right of it, those are based on the selected date range. So again, these two indicators are for the previous and current year, but this number is representative of the information for the selected time frame, which in this case, I've selected as 3 months. And so again, this graph will change based upon which summary you are focusing on at the moment. Now transitioning down to our final section. So this is the opportunities for reducing fuel and energy and/or emissions, as well as fleet electrification potential. So within these 3 summaries, these are going to show the amount of fuel used and the emissions produced specifically while idling. And it will also give you an estimate of how much you can reduce within your fleet. So starting first with the emissions from idling. So this graph is going to show the total amount of emissions produced while idling for the selected time frame, and it will also indicate the percentage change in idling emissions compared to the previous period. And within this emissions from idling section, we have it separated into 2 different categories. First, we have preventable idling. So these are emissions that absolutely can be easily reduced. And then other idling emissions, these are necessary emissions within your operations. We'll discuss more about necessary or productive idling a little later on in the presentation. Moving over to the right, we have the emissions from idling by group. So depending on how many groups you have in your database, okay, if you have more than 20 groups, this particular dashboard is going to show you the top 20 of those groups that have the largest percentage of their emissions being produced specifically while idling. And then continuing to move over to the right again, we have the idling exceptions. So if you prefer to get the insights of the specific number of idling events or seeing how much total time idling has happened within the selected month or time frame, you can get those visualizations within this particular summary. And then finally, in the last section, we have transitioning to EVs. Now, I mentioned we have the EVSA tool under that same sustainability menu where we found this dashboard. But in a way, the sustainability overview gives us sort of a light version, an abridged version, if you will. So by pulling up this overview, it goes ahead and gives us a quick summary of how many of our vehicles could be replaced by a battery electric or plug-in hybrid vehicle based upon, again, driving patterns and other data from within the system. So we didn't even have to do anything. The system did it for us. But again, this is more of the EVSA light. So it tells us how many could be replaced by a specific type of EV. And if we were to move forward with that decision, what would be the potential emission savings if we did that, moved forward with that decision today? So we can see that by replacing these vehicles with an EV equivalent candidate, we can expect to save up to 10 metric tons based upon the data coming from within this database. Okay. Now, with that being said, since that is the EVSA Lite, now I'd like to transition and show you the actual full EVSA tool and where that is located and how it is used. So we're going to go back into the sustainability pillar and go to the EV Suitability Assessment. Now, for the sake of time allotted during this webinar, while I won't unfortunately be able to show you how to do a new EVSA assessment from scratch, I will show you a completed one for reference. With that being said, we do have resources that will be shared at the end of this presentation that will provide guidance on how to run this EVSA in your own database. And I encourage you, following this webinar, to take an opportunity to run a fresh one in your own system to help you gain insights towards real opportunities for electrification potential within your fleet. One thing I want to note about the EVSA is it does not provide a break-even time. It outputs insights based on input costs that you manually put in and also duty cycle data from within the system. So here is a EVSA that I ran just the other day, and I'd like to show you what kind of insights are within that. So it's broken into 3 separate sections. So first we have our recommendation summary. So based upon information that is input from the system and through manual selections of the EV recommendations that are provided by the tool, the system will go ahead and compare based on driving patterns and other data, and will assess which of the selected vehicles that you're running the assessment on could easily be replaced by a battery electric vehicle or plug-in hybrid. So in this example, we assessed 9 vehicles out of the fleet. So that's the benefit of this tool, is it's free, it's in the system. You can run it on as many vehicles as you want, whether that's a small sample or your entire fleet. So in this example, we assessed 9, and out of those 9, 4 are able to be easily replaced today with a battery electric vehicle comparison, and only 5 are not able to. And if you'd like to see the breakdown of which vehicles could be replaced and which ones can't, and the reasons why, we have those helpful tabs over to the right from that summary. Then we move into the costs aspect. So what would be the benefit if we moved to EVs? What would be the cost savings there versus if we stuck with gas-powered vehicles? Now, one thing to note here is we have lifetime replacement costs, and we have the annual electricity and fuel spending. So for the lifetime replacement, again, this is all the costs considered with operating a vehicle, from purchasing outright to maintenance to fuel. Now, one thing that's pretty, I can see that's obvious here, and it's fairly well known amongst those who are well-versed in EVs, but for those who aren't, it's pretty commonly known that electric vehicles are typically more expensive when purchased outright compared to gas vehicles. However, one thing we can note in the trends here is that in the long run, through ownership, we can see that when it comes to fuel spending, it's pretty minimal compared to if we went with gas-powered vehicles. Same thing with maintenance. So we can see those immediate insights relating to if we move forward with EVs versus gas-powered vehicles. Whereas that's for the lifetime replacement, this is for 1 year, okay, of fuel and electricity savings. And as we can see, the difference is pretty drastic. If we moved forward with EVs based on this assessment, we would see a significant savings in electricity costs versus if we stuck with gas-powered vehicles. And then finally, what we're talking about today, emissions reduction. This graph will tell us if we move forward with EVs, how much emissions would be produced versus if we stuck with gas-powered. And as we can see, the difference is pretty drastic for this particular assessment results. So those are the 2 different reports within MyGeotab that can absolutely help with measuring and getting a baseline understanding of emissions. One quick thing I want to mention about the sustainability overview, going back to that for a brief second, is that it was previously a static page, meaning it couldn't be downloaded as an exportable report. But as the end of this past quarter, it is now available as a downloadable report from that page directly. So back to the presentation. Now, one other report, I know I mentioned that there were 2 I'm just going to highlight, but I'd like to quickly highlight that we also have another report called the Greenhouse Gas Emissions Report, which happens to be actually, compared to those 2 I showed you, this is an add-in that is available through the Marketplace. And it calculates monthly and overall Scope 1 emissions and shows trends of those over time. Now, for those who are joining us outside of the US, this is particularly relevant if you are required to comply with the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, or CSRD mandate. So the built-in calculation method that measures Scope 1 emissions within this report has been certified by TÜV Rheinland. Forgive my pronunciation. To simplify the compliance process with that CSRD's regulatory framework, you can generate this report to align with common ESG reporting frameworks, including the Carbon Disclosure Project, or CDP, and Science-Based Targets Initiative, or SBTI. So let's check in with Felix. Now that we've looked at those few different reports to measure emissions, let's see what his experience has been. So after reviewing those 2 reports I mentioned earlier and sharing the results with his boss, Felix has concrete information now about where the company stands on emissions production during the year. And what he's noticed is that while the company's Scope 1 emissions for the year are not as high as he thought, there's still room for improvement. So he has that baseline knowledge now about what emissions are being produced and how much. So now he's curious about finding out baseline information about their fuel spending. And this is leading Felix to now explore his next strategy, which is fuel cost management. So there are two factors that contribute to excess fuel use, which are idling events and driving behavior. So Felix can identify idling and harsh driving activity to be able to understand their impact on both fuel efficiency and emissions reduction. So let's take a closer look at the different fuel efficiency solutions that are within MyGeotab that can help him move the strategy forward. But first, let's talk about how much of an impact does driving behavior have on fuel usage? Well, according to the US Department of Energy, gas mileage usually decreases rapidly at speeds above 50 miles per hour. So with this in mind, it can be assumed that each 5 miles per hour driven over 50 miles per hour is like paying an additional 27 cents per gallon for gas. Okay, so with that in mind, let's see what the impact would be on his light duty and Felix's heavy duty vehicles within his fleet. Okay, so we're taking the consideration of going just 5 miles over the speed limit. Okay, so first we're going to look at how does it impact one single vehicle, and then we'll look at how does it affect the entire fleet. So his light duty trucks, they average 20 miles per gallon, and their average daily driving distance is about 100 miles. Okay, and what they're paying at the pump is about $3.83. So luckily we don't have to do any math because I've already done it for you. So for his light duty vehicles, taking into account that stat from the Department of Energy, that's like them paying an extra $1.35 per day or $6.75 per week extra. And in a year, that's like paying $351 extra in fuel per year. So for a single truck, not too bad. Now that's for the light duty. Let's look at the heavy duty. So for his heavy duty trucks, they're moving a little bit slower, of course. And so they're averaging about 7 miles per gallon, but also driving longer distances, about 200 in a day. And again, taking the same behavior of going 5 over the 50 mile per hour limit with a similar gas price. So for them, that would be like them spending $7.71 extra per day or $38.57 per week extra. And in a year, that would be like an extra $2,000. Again, for a single vehicle, not too bad. But how does that look for his entire fleet? So we're looking at all of the 100 light duty, all of the 100 heavy duty. Okay. So taking what we know from one single vehicle cost for light duty and heavy duty, for his light duty vehicles, that's like paying an extra $135 per day for all light duty and $771 per day for all the heavy duty. So by adding them together, for the total cost that it would be extra for spending per day for all vehicles, that's about $900 a day, $4,500 per week, and for a year, drum roll, almost $250,000. And that is a result of what it could be just by going 5 miles per hour over the posted limit, which seems like, again, it's something we all do. We all do it. But imagine the impact that it has on the bottom line. And as we can see, it's pretty significant. So how can Felix manage this behavior to be able to help out their bottom line? Well, if you joined my colleague Cecilia within the past couple months during the Mastering the Basics of MyGeotab, you likely got a refresher or learned for the first time about the default ABCS rules of safety. So acceleration, braking, cornering, and speeding. So Felix can turn on these default rules, or he can create custom versions of these rules for his specific vehicle groups and be able to track the number and frequency of these violations for each vehicle and each driver. And if he prefers real-time notifications, he can set those up to get an email or a database alert for himself or other users anytime one of his drivers breaks one of these rules. Or if he prefers to get the insights in a report, he can set up a recurring report to monitor these exceptions as well. So we've looked at the impact that driving behavior has on fuel efficiency. Now, how much of an impact does idling have on fuel usage? Well, did you know that idling for more than 10 seconds uses more fuel than just restarting the engine? And did you also know that 1 hour of idling, so leaving the ignition on, but the vehicle's not moving, that's like paying an extra 13 cents extra per gallon of fuel. Okay, so similar to what we looked at with the impact of driving behavior on fuel efficiency, let's see how this factors in to one vehicle versus the entire light duty group of his fleet. Okay, so we're only going to focus on the light duty vehicles within Felix's fleet. So we're going to look at that single vehicle versus the entire subset. So taking into account that per hour of idling, that's like paying an additional 13 or so cents per extra per gallon. What does that factor in for a single vehicle? Well, if we multiply that by the 100 light duty vehicles, that's like paying an extra 67 cents per week or $35 a year for one vehicle. And if we average that for all 100 light duty vehicles, that's like an extra $3,500 per year for the entire light duty sector. Okay, so again, it isn't solely impactful on fuel costs, as we can see. However, this behavior can still lead to other residual effects on operations and your bottom line, which include, of course, excess fuel waste, right? Because it's not being productive towards certain activities. It's just a vehicle that's sitting with the ignition off, which can then lead to unnecessary emissions, which is what our focus is. That also then puts accelerated engine wear and tear on the vehicle, which then can lead to higher maintenance expenses. So while it isn't solely impactful again on fuel, it can lead to these other aspects that can significantly affect the bottom line for your operations. So just like when we talked about driver behavior and its impact, how can Felix manage and monitor when unnecessary or necessary idling is occurring within his operations? Well, similar to those driver behavior rules, we also have two corresponding rules for managing and measuring idling. So we have our general idling rule and our idling within zone rule. So the general idling rule, of course, will track the number and frequency of idling violations for a vehicle or driver or for the whole fleet. And then we have the equivalent, idling within zone is very similar. However, it's also going to help measure that frequency and number of violations in specific zone categories. Now, where this can be helpful for Felix and for you is for the idling within zone rule. He can use this to filter out by incorporating additional conditions. So if he made a custom version of this rule, he can include conditions such as engine regeneration or taking into account PTO use. So those can help filter out the different types of idling. So I mentioned earlier during the sustainability overview that there is necessary or productive idling that it measures, okay? Because not all idling is negatively impactful, okay? So for example, for his short distance and last mile delivery vehicles, there's definitely idling time that is necessary because the vehicle needs to stay parked in order to help with loading and unloading of cargo. Also, if PTO use is occurring, or if there's required climate control, this is also often non-preventable idling that happens. And so that would be considered necessary. Where it would be truly unavoidable would be, for example, his drivers, they like to enjoy lunch in their vehicles and leave the radio on, which occasionally is okay, but if it's happening consistently, it can impact the bottom line. So he wants to be able to distinguish that necessary or productive idling from that absolutely preventable idling. One other thing that's important to note about these rules is, as you can see, they only detect the amount of time that a vehicle has been idling. So if you or Felix, if you want to know the amount of fuel consumed while idling or what is the cost equivalent, we can view this in a different report, which is called the Weekly Idle Cost Report. So this is going to display the total amount of fuel for each vehicle for the desired time period. So here I've got an example of one that I've run for the past, for December of last year. And I went ahead and input I should say this cost is pretty out of date right now for at least us in Las Vegas. I don't know what the case is for everyone else who's on the call, but you can input the fuel cost of your local area into this report, and it factors that into showing you what is the total idle cost for the entire fleet what is the average idle cost per vehicle, and by taking into account the idling duration, so what time during that driving duration was spent idling, we can see what percentage of time while they were out on the road were they spending idling, and then what is the cost equivalent of that time that was spent idling. And he can run this report with all of this detail. But if this is a little too broken down, he can set this up as a dashboard report that looks very much like this, where it shows us the input fuel cost for the area, the time frame in consideration, and now we simply get the total the cost of idling for the entire fleet as a quick insight on the dashboard. And when it comes to looking at fuel consumption events for the fleet over time, Felix can also run this fuel usage report. So it gives us valuable insights to learn which assets are top or bottom performers depending on their usage. And we can talk about usage without also talking about fuel fill-up events. So he can look at this equivalent report that gives us insights into what were the moments where the vehicle received fuel, where it was replenished with fuel, where did it take place, when did it take place, and who did the fueling for that particular vehicle. So now after looking at those reports, let's check in with Felix once again. So after receiving several alerts by setting up those idling and harsh driving rules, and he's also reviewed those few different reports, Felix is noticing a few trends. He noticed that specifically when looking at the idling notifications, that drivers were actually waiting up to 30 minutes in their vehicles for their day's assignments and deliveries, and 30 minutes after while doing their end-of-day paperwork. So that's a lot of time spent idling. He also noticed that when it came to them fueling up their vehicles, that they were visiting fuel stations that were in a different part of town more often, that were higher in price than their approved fueling stations. And so this added extra mileage. And it also showed that they have very high fuel usage compared to the estimated industry average. So these are the kinds of insights that he was able to glean from those resources. But let's take into consideration the extra mileage aspect. So as drivers are visiting fueling stations that are higher in price and that are further away. So taking that extra mileage aspect into account, that now leads him to looking at the next strategy, which is optimizing their routes. So this is a consideration for him to look at how is he assigning vehicles to specific routes and how can they significantly reduce miles driven and also reduce associated emissions. Well, that is where the basic MyGeotab routing solution can come in. And in this case, Felix has his 100 last mile delivery vans in several regions. So by utilizing the basic routing solution, he can create a single route or multiple routes and assign them to his drivers and vehicles for them to utilize during a specified period of time. This way, they're only taking the necessary amount of mileage needed to get from point A to B to C. And we also have additional routing solutions in our marketplace that he can also explore that seamlessly integrate within the MyGeotab platform. And to learn more, he can submit a request through the landing page for any solution of interest and connect with a Geotab expert who can go into more about that solution and how it could help him and the company. So let's check in with Felix on that strategy. So Felix has gone ahead and created various route plans in MyGeotab, and he's assigned them to his last mile drivers. And in 1 week, he's already noticed a significant reduction in the number of unnecessary miles every single day. Now he's decided to take a break from his computer. He's been looking at a lot of reports and solutions, and he's decided to go take a walk in the vehicle yard because it's nice and quiet. But now he's noticing and he's starting to wonder, he's seeing a large handful of vehicles that he's seen haven't left the yard in a while. And he starts to wonder, I wonder if they're being used efficiently or if they're in the right high impact or low impact roles. So in terms of the journey, that leads him to the final strategy, which is single asset and fleet management. And what specifically relates to that strategy is a task called right sizing. Right sizing is when you determine the over and under utilization of vehicles within your fleet. Now, why would it be important to know which vehicles have regular use and those that don't? Well, extra vehicles without regular use equals extra wasted money sitting in that yard or that lot. But when you figure out the appropriate amount of vehicles that are needed for those roles, you are saving money. So let's look at the two final reports that can help with that right sizing task. The first is the asset utilization report. It summarizes a fleet's top 10 most and top 10 least used vehicles. So Felix can use this particular report to ensure that his fleet is less carbon intensive. This shows him which vehicles are more efficient that can be put into high use roles. And then for the less efficient vehicles, he can ensure that those are assigned to lower utilization or the appropriate low use roles that ensures that those vehicles are not having accelerated wear and tear. And when it comes to deciding on if there's a surplus of vehicles that are not being used, he can find opportunities to right size by seeing which vehicles, if they're severely underutilized, whether they are high efficiency or low efficiency, he can determine if those maybe need to be sold off or decommissioned, and then be able to fund that extra savings towards other areas of the company that might need it as well. And finally, we have our very last report, not just of this strategy, but of the entire journey. So this is the fleet distance trend report. So this is going to summarize your fleet's total and average vehicle driving distance for a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. So this will help Felix accurately plan and forecast by helping him identify short or long-term trends in driving distance, which then can help him when it comes to route creation and assignment and make that process even more efficient. So we've looked at a lot of solutions. We've looked at those 4 different strategies that are part of the typical emission reduction journey. So let's fast forward 3 months later. So how is Geotab Global doing? How is Felix doing after this task, this journey? Because there's been a lot he's been looking at. Well, I would say based on his smile, things are starting to go very, very well. And he's seeing actual great insights. So let's see what are some of the impacts that looking at these strategies and solutions have made on the company. Well, overall, they have significantly reduced emissions as a result of looking at those different reports and seeing those different insights and getting that baseline knowledge. And when it comes to their fuel spending, they've gotten such great insights that they've been able to implement changes and a program to be able to make sure that their fuel spending is going down. And we can see their fuel spending is down 50%. That's very significant. And by using those 2 reports that I just discussed earlier, he was able to determine that there was actually 15 underutilized vehicles, either high or low impact, that based upon their non-usage or underusage, he's determined, well, we can go ahead and decommission those. We can sell those and we can reinvest those extra savings into these other areas of the company. And when it comes to idling, I mentioned that earlier he noticed that his drivers were spending a half hour before and a half hour after in idling. Well, based upon the insights from that report and taking action to improve that activity, their idling events per month have dropped dramatically. But even better, folks, I'm happy to say that one of the other goals that Felix and his boss had were to become a recognized sustainability leader in their local community. And I'm happy to say that now Felix has literally reached the peak on his journey, and they are now a recognized sustainability leader in their local community. Now, while I've shown you Felix's journey, each one of you, again, will have your own journey and path to follow. But regardless, Geotab, we are here every step of the way, and we are happy to be there and help you along this journey. Speaking of, is this the end of the journey for Felix and Geotab Global? Not even close. Remember I mentioned that EVSA add-in report? Well, Felix is now having conversations with his boss about moving to the next level in their journey, which is fleet electrification. So to recap, what did we cover today? Well, I looked at the emission reduction journey and showed you how it will be different for each of you and what it can look like overall. And then I showed you the different fuel efficiency strategies that customers can implement that you can implement to measure and take action to reduce emissions within your own fleet. And then for each of those strategies, we looked at the different Geotab native solutions and some marketplace solutions that you can use to implement those strategies and put them into practice within your own organization. Now, this Learning Live session is definitely not the final stop in your learning journey. We have our wonderful Geotab Academy, which is your one-stop shop for all learning resources to learn about everything in the Geotab product suite, including the things that I shared with you today. So I invite you to visit that Geotab Academy, where you can continue your learning journey on any of the solutions I talked about, and even ones we didn't get to. It is 24/7 accessible, and there is no login required. So this link will be shared here in my slide deck, which will be shared with you following this presentation. And Ishi and Jen will also be sharing a list of resources that I've put together that discuss these different solutions and others that we did not get a chance to discuss during this session. But with that, I'd like to say thank you so much for your time and for the questions that are coming through. I truly appreciate your attention and for deciding to join my session. And with that, that brings us to the Q&A portion. So Ishi, let me know what questions we have.
Well, thanks, Dani. Thanks for all that information. I think you made it really clear, some actionable steps people can take today. And we did have a good amount of questions. I think I answered most of them, but I wanted to address a couple things. There are lots of questions around, getting more into detail with the GHG report and things like that. Like Dani mentioned, we're sending out a bunch of links to different documentation, user guides and things like that, where you can dig a little deeper into those. But feel free, after you read through those resources, if something still doesn't make sense, reach out to us in the community, reach out through your support channels. We'll be happy to answer those questions as they come up. And a couple other things that I wanted to mention about the reports we mentioned that you go to the marketplace to get, these are free reports from the marketplace.
Right, yes.
These don't come at additional cost. So feel free to download these from the marketplace and read about them there. So I had an interesting question. I wonder if you are up for answering, but somebody asked what maintenance activities help with reducing fuel usage. I wonder if you can think of any maintenance activities that will help with that.
That is an excellent question. So ironically, in my earlier version of this training presentation, there was a section that was going to be included related to maintenance. And some of the activities I had planned in the earlier version of this to demonstrate, one of them would be tires. So properly inflated tires can absolutely have an impact on fuel efficiency, underinflated or overinflated. I would say oil changes especially, right? Because any particular maintenance aspect of a vehicle is going to significantly impact their fuel efficiency. But I would say an easy one to address would be tires. Inflation would definitely be a big maintenance task to be able to take on for that. Yes.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's an easy place to start. And I think it's safe to say that, maintenance and fuel efficiency go hand in hand a lot of times. If you have a properly maintained vehicle, it's probably operating at the max it can operate at. So thanks for that. Thanks for your insight there and all the knowledge you shared today. We will follow up with a document that has all these questions in them, all the answers that I gave throughout the presentation. So you can go back and read through there. And like I said, if you have additional questions or if, maybe my answer didn't make sense or something like that, feel free to come to the community. We can, get into a little more detail with you, really hash out some of those finer details, because I know this is an important topic and something that you want to be able to take action on today, and you can take action today. So with that, I think we'll end it. We'll give you 5 minutes back, but thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dani, for this presentation. Thank you, everybody, for staying till the very end, and we'll see you next week. Mark your calendars. We'll be back again with another learning session for you, and have a great rest of your day, everybody.
Thank you so much.